My name is Brian Stoll. I'm a content management developer for the Seattle University Law School. And I'm going to be presenting our content management lessons learned. It's also a looking forward. And what this is it's the culmination of, I guess, a 3-year cycle or a 3-year project. About 3 years ago, the development team set out to design a website and a content management system that was extensible, so that it could be transformed or ported to different formats, as well as it had a convenient authoring system, a CMS that allowed for authors to create content in an environment that they were familiar with, and allowed for a workflow, and then again, an extensible publishing framework. I actually came on last year, so what that means in this presentation is I'm going to take credit for all the things that worked well, and I'll blame everything else on the people that started it. But since I'm mentioning them, I should also say our Associate Dean of Information Services, Steve Burnett, is back there, and also our web developer, Carla Houston. They had a big part in this from the start, as well. James Cooper, the Director of Technology, and Michael Caldwell all had a big part in creating this system. What I'm going to talk about today is a site and system description, so just go through our website, the basics of what it is that we're creating and how it works. Then I'll talk about source management, that is collection. Where is the content coming from? Authors, from syndicated sources, from static and dynamic content. Then I'll talk about transforms. So once we have the content in there, how are we getting it out, and in what publishing targets and what format are we going to be publishing it to. Finally, I'll touch briefly on hardware and software, conclude with wrap up, and then questions and feedback. And feel free to jump in with questions or comments throughout the presentation. And if I gloss over something you want more detail on, let me know. If I'm going too slow over tedious detail, you can also let me know. So, our site and system description. Our web servers and our web services are based on a Linux operating system, currently Red Hat 9. We're looking to upgrade now, so we're a little bit behind, but as many of you know, Red Hat went to a proprietary system. We have to pay for licensing, so deciding whether we want to do that, although the education license is pretty cheap, or move to one of the free versions such as Fedora, etc. Then we use a whole host of Apache services. Probably many of you are familiar with Apache Web Server for our web service, and that integrates then with Apache Tomcat, which is a web container that serves Java servlets. We can do dynamic content with that, so JSP pages. And it also powers the Apache Cocoon framework, which is the core of our content management system, or our content management framework. And what that basically manages where the content's coming from and where it's going to go to. And I'll talk more on that. We also use Apache ANT to build our distributions and to do pre-transform content. So content we don't want to transform at request time. ANT is really useful for creating and doing those transforms ahead of time. Red Hawk CMS is our homegrown CMS. It's an XML-based system, and I will talk more about that. But that's the system that our authors can log into via their web browser, create content, submit it for publishing and review by editors, and then come to the website. And finally, we're lucky to share the Google Search Appliance with the main campus. So there are a lot of different search tools, and obviously that one works pretty well. We set up indexes for searching content in general, as well as like specific content repositories. And then this is I guess a little workflow for how we create the content. Our developers and our authors have their individual workstations. Developers submit their content to version control. We're using VSS. This integrates nicely with Macromedia. And authors can submit to Red Hawk, like I said. Once we have it in version control, we build it on a staging server for testing purposes. And then our production server, once it's ready, we can build it to our production server, which also receives content. So this would be static content, dynamic content, and then this is authored content through our CMS. And then we also use syndicated content from syndicated sources. And all three of those sources create the content on our production server. All right, so to talk a little bit more about where the content comes from and where it goes to, I listed out some examples, and I tried to to make lines between them all, but kind of turned, you couldn't really tell much, so I tried to color code them, and then it just kind of became a rainbow. But what this is demonstrating is, or trying to demonstrate anyway, is the main website receives content from the Red Hat repository, from static files, and from dynamic content. But we also have student portal and many other portals, I think around 10 portals for different organizations within the department. And but a lot of the content, for example, the student portal, probably 80 or 90% of the content is the same as the content we have in the student section on the main website. So rather than manage that in two places, they both pull from the same static repository or Red Hat, depending on what the content is. So that lets us repurpose content across different properties in our website. And we have the different portals. We also publish content to a system we call the dockets, which are touch screens based on Flash. And I'll show you an example. But we have those throughout the school so students can walk up and touch the screen and find information out that way. And the goal is obviously to minimize how much content we manage, so only manage it in one place and then use it as many places as we want. All right, so another goal of the extensible content resource is to publish not only to different properties but also in different formats. So we publish to Flash, we publish like our dockets, or we have a Flash version of the website. We also publish to standard HTML site, and we also have a text-only version of the site. I can show you an example right now. For example, this is a Flash version of the site. Actually, if you go to a different section, the header does some fancy Flash animation. And once they've seen it once, then we keep track of that unless they clear their cookies, so they don't have to go through the animation every time. But that's an example of the Flash version of your site. We have a standard version, which is straight HTML and images, and then we also have a text-only version. A couple nice things about having different versions is it provides the content in the format that the user prefers. For example, a lot has been talked about compliance for disabilities, blind students, and so forth. And we have a blind student that uses our text-only version quite a bit, and it's useful because it is really difficult to keep your designers happy and still be ADA compliant. So having separate versions makes that possible, and is one way to do that. And if you're only creating those versions from the same content, you don't have to manage it once, then it's not extra work to do. I'll also show you real quick on here. We have our student portal, and this content down here is from the docket, so that's announcements that go into our Red Hat system, one of the things that we manage with the Red Hat system. And we can put things in there like class cancellations. Those will be high quality, they'll come to the top and be really well pronounced so that students can see that. We can target specific content to the students that way. We also have our docket, which publishes those same announcements, and this is what they would see in the touch screens. Up here to the right is there's a CNN feed that it's not going to come through on the web browser, but they would also have a CNN feed when they're looking at the documents in person. And if they can also look up information from some of our databases. If they want to find out who this great content management developer is, they can go down here, look up personnel, find out where their offices are. We also get syndicated content via these weather conditions here that we pull from NOAA. And we also have syndicated content from the U.S. Legal News that we publish on a different docket for the library. So that was just some of the examples I just went through, and if you guys want copies of this, for some reason you want copies of this presentation, and I'll put the URLs in there for you to look at so you know what I was referencing. So that is the basic description of our site, and are there any questions about that? All right, so source management. I mentioned the Red Hat the Red Hawk system previously. What it is it's a basic content management system that we created in-house. You can create templates based on XML schemas, so we can control the type of content our authors are publishing. For example, we have Access to Justice Institute that publishes cases, so we have section for a title and a header, and then like drop downs for the district, so that it's a controlled list. They can put in year, and they have different text sections so that it matches the way they need to publish the case. There's a lot of different content types. Although when we first started, there was only announcements and events, and since it's grown to over 16 different content types, and the amount of content that we have, as you can imagine, over the last two to 3 years has grown quite a bit. So therein lies one of the problems with lessons learned is that XML content or XML repositories are really useful for their extensibility, but you have to really manage how that data is being stored and accessed. For example, our Red Hawk system is slower than it should be, and a big reason is that the content's not indexed properly. Years are in the content rather than in metadata, where it can be indexed or queried. So you can imagine, instead of querying on a year, you have to go into the document and identify the year. That can take a lot of time because you're parsing all of the content. So one of the main lessons learned is that I think in moving forward, we will either store our XML content in a database and have metadata associated with it that is relevant to the type of queries that we want to do. For example, the year, the author, the judge, the district. Or perhaps even more simpler, keep the content in a database, all that information in relative fields in the database, and then query it into an XML format when you run the query. So either way it work. And in a lot of cases now, although they weren't quite as prevalent when 3 years ago, they hadn't come as far along. There's a lot of different content management systems I'm sure you probably heard a lot about throughout this conference that can do similar stuff in terms of they will manage the content for you. So in moving forward, we'll probably look at perhaps implementing one of those for the same purpose. And I know I've seen now that it's been mentioned quite a few times, but there's a couple of resources that are really good. Open source CMS lets you play with those content management systems. Those are all PHP based. And then another good resource if you're looking at open source content management is oscom.org, open source content management. So they have a lot of reviews and there's a lot of content management systems on there. So another part of Red Hawk that is the authoring environment, and that is the WYSIWYG environment, which is most common with most content management systems. A big lesson learned here is that for us, our WYSIWYG is an Altova product called Authentic, and it works well. It's nice because it is created basically from the schemas, so we don't have to regenerate the WYSIWYG each time we want to do it. But it's an ActiveX control-based WYSIWYG, which is not cross-browser functional, so if someone's using Firefox, they're going to have to switch to IE. Another problem that we've had with ActiveX controls is security problems. People have their laptops or their desktops locked down way tight, and it's going to prevent them from installing the ActiveX control. So we'll have to go in and one of our IT staff has to manually install the ActiveX control that powers this WYSIWYG on their desktop, where they should just be able to browse to the source and have it automatically download. In the future, there's a lot of WYSIWYG plugin options out there now, a lot of JavaScript based and cross-browser compliant. So unless someone gives you a really good reason why an ActiveX control will work for a situation, I would recommend looking at non-ActiveX control-based plugins for your authoring environment. The third thing that is really relevant to our source management is workflow. Currently, we have one workflow for all of our content types. We have authors that can create content. We have editors that can, and administrators that can review and either change and improve that content or reject it. then once it's approved, it can be published out to the main website. And this has worked really well, and it's probably appropriate for in 80 or 90% of our content. But there are cases where it would be really helpful to have a flexible workflow. For example, we have some events that are published that require resources from media, where they might require videotaping or some sort of camera or some sort of resource from media, and that has to be approved by our media manager before the event can be scheduled, if it indeed requires that. So what would be nice, instead of the event being published to an editor who then has to inquire with our media manager to get approval before they publish the event, it would be nice if the workflow could route the media manager into that. So I think flexible workflows are an important thing to keep in mind if that's relevant to your situation. It's a useful thing, and many of the content management systems allow for that. Moving on, another big part of content that you're publishing is going to be date-based, perhaps the event or a schedule, and we can publish that through Red Hawk, but in some cases, in many cases, it's redundant information that's been scheduled in someone's paper calendar, in their Outlook calendar, in an organization or department's calendar, and so we're creating and managing the same information, the same schedule, many different places. That not only creates extra work, but it also doesn't communicate that event across all parties in the most efficient manner. So one of the things that we're looking forward to doing in our next revision is incorporating a more integrated calendar-based content management, so that, for example, the administrator of a department or the director of a department might schedule an event in their Outlook calendar. They can export that to a main web-based calendar that can be then reviewed and approved by the appropriate individuals, the media resources manager, and perhaps the administrator of the school. And once it's published to the main web calendar, we can also then pull that content and publish it to our docket, and publish it to our website. And so now that one event that was scheduled by one person has been disseminated and approved to all the individuals from one piece of content, rather than having the same event managed in 5 different places. So that's a big part of one of the features that we're looking to move forward with in our next version of the system. And then, as I mentioned previously, another source of our content is syndicated content. Probably many of you are also using syndicated content, and you see more and more now when you go to a website, the content has a little XML button or a little RSS feed button at the top right or somewhere associated with an article. It's really easy to create a service that requests that XML and processes it into, or transforms it into the type of content that you want to publish, and then you can use that content from the site to, if it's relevant content for your own site, you can publish it there. Like I said before, an example is we use like current and forecast data to publish weather information for the Seattle area. Jurist has news that they publish, Jurist legal news, or Jurist, I guess, the German name. Jurist legal news publishes syndicated content that we request and publishes in a ticker in our library, so that relevant information comes up in real time. So you just have to have a way, once you identify the content you would want, syndicated content you would like to use, you just have to have a way of requesting it and processing it. And for which we use Apache Cocoon, and this is where I'll start talking about transforms. So up until now I've been talking about how we get the content into our system and what sources it comes from and how we manage it. So now that it's in there, it's extensible, it's in an XML format. I need to get it to our different publishing targets that I described earlier, to the docket, to the websites, to the different portals. Each of them can take a different format. So how we do that, and that's through transforms. And the framework that we use to publish that content is Apache Cocoon. Cocoon. It integrates nicely with Apache Web Server, with any, it's based on the Tomcat Web Server container. So if you're using any of those technologies, it already integrates very nicely. And essentially, what Cocoon is it's well, it's a Java-based XML web publishing framework. To be precise, but to be more general or more descriptive, it separates the concerns between content, logic, and style. So you can identify where is your content coming from and request it. You can process it, so you can add information, headers, combine it with existing data that you have, so you can put whatever logic you want into that data or into that content, and then you can publish it in the style and format that you want. And this is what Cocoon describes this as a pipeline: content, logic, and style. And when you think about it, it's really nice, regardless of whether you're using Cocoon or whatever system you're using. If you think about your content in those three frameworks, you have people that create the content, people that know where the relevant content should come from. Most likely, they don't really care what the code is like, what the logic is like. They just know that they want to create it, identify it, and that they want it published in the places that's relevant to them. Then you have your developers, your administrators, who don't really care what the content says necessarily, perhaps. They don't really care what it looks like, but they're just concerned about how to publish it in the most efficient manner and make it go where you want it to go. And then you have your designers who, probably don't care necessarily what the content is, where it comes from, or the logic that's applied to it. They just want it to look really good and be fancy, all those things that designers care about. So Cocoon, and there are other frameworks that really let you separate these three things and manage them without having to create a lot of coordination between the three entities. And that there still has to be coordination, but Cocoon is a nice way of bringing them together, letting them work together. So here's an example of what I talked about. The generator to the left requests either data from syndicated content or other websites, XML sources. It can also read from files, so your static content on your web server or on your file server. It can read from. It can also be configured to read from different databases. So you can set up your database connections and implement queries to get your data. And then once you have your data, you apply the logic to it. And I mentioned before what that is, but a lot of times, like most commonly for us, we primarily use XSLT to create logic, and a lot of styles apply to there too. Then XSLT basically takes data and creates a markup language with it. So you're going to create other XML information, or you're going to create HTML most commonly with it. There's other transforms as well, like XSLTFO, which you may have heard of, that can create PDF files from data. So you can create a lot of different document types with your different transforms. And then once you have that data, then you can serialize it to the specific type of file that you want. So it can become a PDF file. I put SVG down there, but I've never done a transform to create an image. I think it can be done. So, and then most commonly HTML or XHTML or XML. Some things to keep in mind about transforms, and some lessons learned for us, is that transforms can be very expensive in terms of time and memory. So if you're doing all your transforms on request when the user wants it, there's a chance that user is going to have to wait. Well, that user will have to probably wait longer than if they were getting static content that was already compiled into HTML. So you want to try to manage your system so that you're not running requests at runtime or request time. You want to try to transform as much of your content ahead of time as you can. Some different ways to do that is to identify the content that is common to the different areas, the different portals, or the different pages on your website, the headers and the footers. Keep those in separate files, transform them individually, and then include them in a request, rather than transforming the entire header every time, or footer, or the other common content. Another very important way you can do this is to transform static content. If you have a lot of XML files that you know are going to be published and they're not going to deviate with any dynamic query or any action, you can transform all those ahead of time. We use Apache Ant to do that. And then it'll already be transformed into an HTML format, and that can be requested directly. So that leaves, well, in this example, like if the circle is your content and the lines represent the different pieces of content in your site, we've just eliminated 75% of the content that you're serving having to be transformed at request time. So the only content that you might have to transform at request time is dynamic content that can vary based on query or whatever other personalization effects that you want to implement. And that, yeah, this was just a brief comment, but another thing that Cocoon allows you to do is personalization, something that we're probably looking to do more of. Is you can identify your users either based on the login, so the information is in session ID, or storing that information in the cookies, so you have a profile of your users, and then serving them relative content, requesting content that's relative to them. Are they a student? Are they faculty, staff? Are they in a certain class that they need to know specific information about? So it's not really actually relative to transforms as much, but just that Cocoon allows you to do a great deal of personalization within that whole pipeline flow that I discussed. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a question. If you store all your data in a database ability, and then you pull it out and transform it index or really takes it all over, transform it into HTML so that it, you don't have to keep transforming it over and over again. Where do you store the final HTML? It's not in the database again, is it? Or
It's not in the database. You just store it on your web server or your file server, wherever your web server knows to look for those files. Pardon me?
You would link where you stored it and go back to the database?
I don't think you would really need to. For example, with Cocoon, the request could come in from the user to your web server, and then it passes it on to Cocoon. Cocoon will say, look for this file, look for this pre-transformed file on the file server or on the web server. And if it's not there, the logic will say, okay, let's request it from the database. As when it's requested, it can write the file to HTML and then serve it to the client. And then the next time the request comes in, it can just look for that file, except this time it will find it and then serve it. Or ideally, if that was a static piece of content, then you would have already had it pre-transformed on your file server, your web server, and then served. Does that make sense? So briefly, quick note about hardware and software. Talk a lot about Apache products. I don't know if you guys are very familiar with Apache, but it's an open source suite, so it's free. It's open. If you really want, you can get in and muck around with the source code. They have an incredible suite of products. They're very popular. The Linux operating systems, of course, are also open. We've heard a lot about those probably throughout this conference. We rely on those quite a bit, and it's nice for us not to have to really worry about licensing too much. In any case, we don't have to worry about what it's going to cost to implement. There is a lot of development effort that is required, but it's been well worth it in terms of the flexibility and the cost and not having to coordinate with the licenses. Another just kind of side note that I think is worth mentioning is memory management. Web services such as Cocoon and Java tend to eat a lot of memory. Fortunately, memory is really cheap, but it's not just enough to stick it in your server or your box and say, okay, I've got a gig of memory, it should be fine, because if you don't, for example, close your connections to your database, you're not going to get that memory back, and it will just eat up memory until it's used a gig of memory and then shut down. So you have to be real careful with your development. You also have to give it allotments, like give it, if you have a gig of memory on your web server, you might allow Java to use 500 megs, so it can't use all of the memory and shut the server down and then just keep an eye on it. This is, it's not very much fun. I've spent like weeks at a time like doing memory, tracking down memory, where how it's being used, and trying to manage it better and reconfigure it. So it's not very fun. It's not very glamorous, but it's something that really is important to consider when you implement web services across maybe especially open source web services. So I guess I'll just conclude by kind of regurgitating the points that I thought were valuable today. We have an extensible content repository that allows us to manage our content from one location, one time, and then publish it to multiple targets, multiple different web properties, as well as in multiple formats or versions. So we get a lot of mileage out of one piece of content. We're probably going to start using XML more as a medium rather than as the source. So, moving to either indexing or XML in a database or querying it from a database and creating XML. We're going to move to a more cross-browser compliant WYSIWYG controls, such as the JavaScript-based one, rather than the ActiveX controls. Control-based WYSIWYG authoring environments. Customizable workflow could be really useful for us in the future, allowing more than just authors, editors, and publishing stages to be implemented, but customizing it to the type of content and what its workflow requires. We're going to try to better incorporate calendar-based content so we can streamline the way events are scheduled and managed throughout the schools. And Cocoon allows for cohesion. One nice thing that I guess I didn't mention about Cocoon is that you have all of your content, all the content sources, all the logic that you call, and the logic isn't all done in Cocoon. Like you might, in the logic in Cocoon, you might point to a Java servlet or another piece of dynamic code or that does the logic and then brings it back to Cocoon. But you have all of your content tied to one central map, essentially, and that can be really helpful when you have a lot of different content sources and a lot of different publishing targets, and they're reusing content this way. You get that messy rainbow thing. It's nice to have a map to go to and say, this is where it's all coming from, this is where it's all going to, and this is what's making that happen. And Cocoon then, of course, allows for the transforms request, ties it all together. Transforms, you want to eliminate redundancy in transforms so that you're not, and you want to try to be efficient with the transforms, like I mentioned, so you're not doing multiple transforms where one would suffice, pre-transforming and so on. And then the open source software, as I just discussed, I don't think I need to re-mention that, but that brings me to the end of my presentation.
Backing up to the author piece,
Sure.
how rich a word processing or an HTML processing environment do you give the author? How many different, a bold button and italics button, how much stuff do you have there?
We allow, it's pretty basic, we allow bold italics. It can do bulleted lists, numbered lists, paragraphs. Another nice thing that we've been able to do and we want to continue to do moving forward is implement a way that they can implement, like if they're mentioning a specific person or a specific room in the paragraph, they can right click and say insert person or insert room, and then it gives them a controlled list of the rooms in the school or people or relevant people that they might want to publish. So and the nice thing about that is when it's published, that becomes a link. So when you're doing it, you can link and see who that person is or see where that room is. So that's kind of a nice piece of content. And I think also, although we have one uniform, we allow the same amount of controls for everybody. But a lot of systems, and a nice way to do it is to be able to identify the user or the user group and then decide what controls you want to give them. So an author might log in and have bold and italic, whereas an editor might have the ability to do, put HTML code into the text box, or do a little bit more dynamic stuff that you might not want your authors to be doing.
If you're talking now about what shows up in the rich text editor,
Yeah.
do you then do some separate stage of validation and filtering on what's ventured? And just not having ever used one of these controls or plugged it in, what are the considerations I have to have?
Sure. Well, ideally, with the ideal way that the control would be implemented is that it wouldn't allow the user to put anything in there that would break the validation, essentially. So, for example, if an author was trying to put HTML text into the text box, it would just come out as HTML. They'd just see the HTML when it's published, rather than whatever they were trying to create with HTML. We do validate, like on submission, and it's validated. So if there are any problems, we can give an error message, or we get alerted when we try to build that, like, so and such and such a document or source is not valid. This is why, and we can correct it. But I would focus more on trying to control what goes in is valid and locking that down, rather than validating it after the content is created. If that makes sense.
All right. I mean, if you are allowing them to enter multiple paragraphs or semi-structured data,
Right.
using just basically the commands of the toolbar, is that how it works?
Yeah, so for example, they can type in the text box, and then if they want to do a new paragraph, they can return. If they want to bold, they can highlight a word and click bold.
And this creates some form-based command behind the scenes, right?
Right, so the template upon which that WYSIWYG is created is an XML schema, essentially. And so the content from that template is then imported to an XML document that conforms to that schema. And that schema conforms to the format with which we want that XML to be stored on.
And then you have filters for cut and paste of Word, for example.
Well, actually, ideally, yes, but in actuality, that causes problems sometimes, where it doesn't really break anything, but it just doesn't come out. The little character or smiley face or whatever they had in their Word document comes out as the ASCII text rather than comes out as garbage, rather than what they intended. So
Smart quotes.
right. So that's actually a lesson learned for us, because that's something that causes problems. Yeah.
You mentioned the Cocoon for Apache. Are you aware of anything that was similar product for IIS?
Cocoon actually, I believe, will incorporate with IIS. So the Apache webs. Well, let's see. No, that's not true. That's not true at all. It will run on Windows, I should say, but in Apache it runs on Windows. But in terms of IIS, I don't know. You might look at, there's a content management framework called Zope, which is based on Python. Zope. And Z-O-P-E.
I walked into the job where you have IIS.
That's what you have, huh? Well, actually, if you want to touch base later, I can look at some ideas for you. You might look at something.
I think you could set up a similar pipeline with ASP.NET and that is now everything.
So, thanks all for coming, and if you have any questions or you want the slides, feel free to contact me.